just in terms of how this session will run this morning, I'll start by sharing some of my insights and tell you a bit about my journey, if that's okay with you all. I'll then hand over to Niran, who will do the same, and we'll then have an opportunity for questions. Now, if you've got an absolute burning question that you just want to ask me towards the end of my time, then more than happy to take a few. But we want to leave enough of an opportunity towards the end for us all to have a conversation. Is that okay? So you'll hear from, as I said, from myself and Niran. We've got two different perspectives. Niran and I, how do we know each other? Niran and I both worked together at HMRC for a time, and we also were both on the Minority Ethnic Talent Association Growing Talent Programme as well, on a particular cohort together. And I think we were the best cohort personally, but that's just my take. I think it's really important to say that, and I'm sure Niran will concur with this, is that I don't for 1 minute, and I'm sure Niran does not profess to have all the answers. What I can't say to you is this is the path to X or to Y. What I can certainly do is share some insights, share my experiences, and I'm more than happy. I'm going to be coming back for the networking lunch to talk to people about what those experiences have been. Yeah, so that's what we're kind of here to do today. So, a bit about me first of all. And I've done this in a slightly different way to what I've done in previous times that I've kind of done a talk, only because, do you know when you hear from a speaker and you think, I wonder how old they are, I wonder a bit more about their life. I mean, we're all a bit nosy, aren't we? We want to know about people. So I thought, do you know what, I'll tell you a bit about me, and then if you want to know any more, then please do, as I said, find some time a little bit later on. So I was born in 1979, you're all going to work out really quickly, I'm 38, 39 later this year. So born in 1979 to a father who was a civil rights activist and a mother who was far from conventional and a strong supporter of my father's organisation. That's where they met, fell in love, and Natasha came along. You might think I was destined then, thinking about those two personalities, to push boundaries. But I wonder how much of that was nature and how much of that was nurture. We can have that debate another time. I benefited for a short period of time from a private education in my early years. I was the only person of colour in this school at the age of 7. I remember on my first day, one of the girls coming up to me, just rushing up to me with such excitement, please, please, and I'm thinking, what's she going to ask me? Can I touch your hair? It wasn't something I experienced before. I then went on to a grammar school. My mum was like taking me to a tutor once or twice a week because she was determined to ease up on her pocket, that kind of private school fees. I was told from a very early age that I was bright. I'm not sure how bright I was, but I was often told that you're just as clever as your mum. And so, like my mum, I carried lots of books in every bag that I had. I didn't necessarily read them all. And I tried to live up to the 3 degrees that my mum had achieved by that point in her life. At 15, I started to work in retail. I thought, absolutely, I had made it. I worked at Goldie. That was a local retail store in Birmingham. And I soon moved on to Mex, and I thought, no, I haven't made it. Now I've made it. Working for a national retailer where I became a young manager at 18, yes, I told everybody. I thought, as I said, I absolutely had made it. And we'll come back to this concept of, when you think you've made it a little bit later on. And at 21, I fell in love. I secured a place on Marks & Spencer's graduate programme. I moved down to southwest London. And I quickly wanted to go back home to the Midlands. And once again, I thought I had made it. I was on track. I had a bright career at Marks & Spencer. Prior to the end of the scheme, I found myself at a permanent appointment in the Midlands. And a few years later, my son Cairo came along. I fell out of love. And that's a long story for another day. At the time, though, I didn't quite know. And the reason why I mention that is not because I'm just sharing, but actually, I was really wondering, how am I going to make it all work now with my little boy? I had been through 3 restructures at Next at that time, and by this point, I really could not understand how I'd survived every single restructure and somehow come out better the other side. I remember the last restructure, I was pregnant at the time actually, and they'd said to me, well, yes, we found an opportunity, I'm really excited for you, Natasha. It's in Wales. I've got nothing against Wales, but I live in Birmingham, and you remember me saying I lived in South West London and I wanted to come home. The last thing I needed at that point in time, being pregnant, was the thought of moving to Wales where I had nobody. And as it happens, the chain in another particular move had broken down, and I was offered the opportunity to work in stores that I could actually commute to, Cheltenham, Gloucester, you know, who wants to do that when you're heavily pregnant? Nobody really, but actually it's about taking the opportunity that presents itself at the time. So I took that opportunity. I survived, as I said, those different restructures. And I learnt a lot in those early stages of my career, and I made lots of mistakes, some more monumental than others. I continued to raise Cairo in the best way that I knew, and I'm pleased to say that he's a healthy and happy 13-year-old. My measure of success is that he loves nothing more than to play his PS4, to give me cheek, and to go on his mobile phone. So I take that as a good sign of typical teenage behaviours that I'm doing a good job. As I said, that at the time, when the earlier years with Cairo, I did struggle to juggle the demands of a young child with the demands of a late night opening store. So by this time I was working at the Merry Hill store in the Midlands. And my commitment was called into question. It was the first time in my career that somebody had said, you know, do you really want to give your all to this? Can you really give your all? I was really quite taken aback, actually, if I can be honest with you, because it wasn't that I wasn't committed. I was exhausted physically and emotionally, and quite frankly, I was knackered most days going into work. I then experienced one of my most difficult phases of my career. I don't often talk about this particular point in my career, but I think it is worth sharing because we all go through difficult times. But a new store manager came in with some new expectations. I'd previously enjoyed a really open and positive working relationship with the previous store manager, Rob Davies, and actually he's one of the people who helped to advocate in my career. But this new manager, Matt, I won't share his surname, but this new manager, Matt, I remember him saying, you know, it'd be good if we could go out for a coffee, Natasha. He'd made a few comments about me being late for a team talk or whatever else, and what he didn't know was the backstory about what was going on at home for me. And actually, I didn't feel like I could share that with him. But I genuinely felt that there were, what's the word I'm looking for? So there were other people who were probably late for one team talk, or you know, hadn't delivered on a particular project, but for some reason I was under the microscope and I felt it getting more and more pressured. I also felt there could be an undertone of me being treated differently, but I didn't know how to express it and I didn't know what to do about it. Years on, I reflected back and I thought, actually I probably should have done something about it. I probably should have tackled that. I probably should have raised a complaint actually in terms of the way that I was treated. But you know, we all learn. But not only was my commitment questioned, my capability was brought into question again for the first time. I couldn't see a way out, so I took some time off and I really thought long and hard about what to do, and I found a way out. I think that's the key thing to leave you guys with. I found a way out. I needed to reset. I needed to regain my confidence that had been depleted over a number of months, and I needed to get my mojo back, essentially. So I joined the Highways Agency in 2007, and little did I know that I was joining the civil service. No one really explicitly made that clear. So the Highways Agency at the time, bit of a backdoor route in. So the Highways Agency at the time was an executive agency of the Department for Transport. I undertook a number of business partner roles between 2007 and 2014, moving to HMRC in 2011. And I applied for various development opportunities, partly because actually I was encouraged by people who had seen something in me. I was selected and joined the Meta cohort. As I said, that's where I met Niren. And the programme helped me to better navigate government, because I don't think I really understood government to the extent that I probably needed to be able to progress. And allowed me to also test my transferable skills when I took a short, we had a short opportunity to work in other government departments. I was really also very fortunate to learn from colleagues across the cohort who again had lots of experience that I could tap into. Listening to people talking about how they'd worked with ministers, I was like, wow, you know, I need to know more about this stuff. So listening to their experiences and how they position themselves for the future was really, for me, one of the greatest takeaways from that particular programme. So I joined Ofwat, which is where I am now, towards the end of 2014. At the time, there was much to do. It was an organisation that was in some amount of flux. But I was so excited to work with the then Chief Executive. I enjoyed a huge amount of autonomy in the role and was responsible for the whole HR function. And at that point, I had made it, as far as I was concerned. It wasn't about the label per se. So I was the head of HR at the time in a principal level role, which is the equivalent of a grade 6, grade 7. And it's fair to say that since I joined Ofwat, it's been a a hell of a journey, a roller coaster of a journey. There've been many, many highs and many lows, and I've made mistakes. But the great thing is I've learnt and I've grown from those as a result, and I'm a better leader as a result of those mistakes. I think the thing that I wanted to draw together for you all, just in terms of a little bit about my journey, is that in every role that I've had over the last 10 years or so, there's been someone who's helped to nurture and support my ambition. They identified opportunities that I might take, so it might be Meta or something else. They've helped me focus on my development. They've encouraged me to do different things. They've reminded me of my capabilities when I needed to be reminded. They've shared their experiences, and they've provided a safe space for me, which has been most important to me, actually. This sounds like a little bit of a eulogy in some ways, you know, me going through kind of, but it's helpful, I hope, to understand kind of where I started. Each of us in this room will have had a different start in life. There's no doubt about that. We'll have faced challenges as women, as mothers, partners, and as employees. And we could talk today just simply about the fact that women of colour face multiple barriers and what we should do about it. But I'm not convinced that's the answer, to simply focus on those two elements. One of the ways in which I believe we can address or redress imbalance is that we find in organisations people that we can develop, and we find the opportunities and the space and time to develop ourselves. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to share with you just 6 kind of top tips, I suppose, or insights that I'd encourage you to reflect on as you plan your own journeys. Okay, so the first is understand who you are and what you have to offer. So really, this is about focusing on you in the now. And I don't think, in fact, all of the reflections that I'm sharing with you, I don't think they're necessarily specific to being a woman or specific to being a black woman. I think they're specific to people. But actually, I think we should be encouraged to talk about these things more as women and as women of colour. So I just want to share with you just the opening of my CV, if that's okay. So this is how I describe myself. A results-driven HR and OD professional with a proven track record of positively affecting organisational effectiveness, organisational capability and employee engagement. A highly proficient, innovative and transformational leader who is passionate, motivated, committed, personable, charismatic and well regarded. You've got to be fairly confident, haven't you, to put all of those things into your opening statement. But, you know, there's something to be said about that. Understand who you are and what you have to offer. I'm going to keep reiterating it because I think it is really that simple. One of the things that I've used throughout my career, and I've just put up here as, again, a tool that you might want to use. Have anyone heard of Johari's window? Yeah, a few nods around the room. It's just a tool that you might use to think about how you understand who you are. Because what you understand and see of yourself is not necessarily what you want, not necessarily what other people see of you. Yeah? So I may think this of me as a highly proficient, innovative, but I need to test that, and I'll come on to that in a moment. The other thing that I thought was just worth pulling out is that it's important that you understand who you are, not just professionally, but personally. So the journey that you go on is not one of Natasha, director of people at Ofwat. It's just Natasha. I happen to be in the role at Ofwat, but actually I take myself to and from work, home, church, everywhere else. I'm still that same person. So actually it's about thinking about yourself in the whole, not just in the work context. And finally, what I'll leave you with on this particular slide is you are your biggest supporter. Nobody should support you like you support yourself, but you're also your biggest critic, or you should be your biggest critic. So be prepared to listen to you, to listen to your instinct, but also be prepared to develop and adjust. We haven't got it right. I am far from the perfect article, even though my CV does describe me as being pretty perfect. But that's about you putting your best foot forward, and that's okay. Okay, second insight. Understand how others perceive you. So the flip side of what we were just saying about yourself, understand how others perceive you and experience your leadership. Again, I talk about being a transformational leader. Very it could sound very aspirational. I've got to test that. I've got to understand from the people that I do lead whether that's actually how it feels. And I work with a colleague who is my complete polar opposite, but we get on famously, we really do. But I am in that big picture thinking, everything is possible, come on guys, and she's in the practicality. It's going to take us 450 hours to do that, Natasha. How are we going to do that? I've got 2 people. And so we meet somewhere in the middle. But it's really important that I understand how she perceives my leadership. There are days when she absolutely loves that. She loves that I'm taking her out of her comfort zone. There are days when she absolutely hates it. And I've got to understand, engage and operate within that. But it's really important that you understand your leadership. The other thing I'd ask you to do is think about what do others say about you when you're not in the room. And I don't mean in the kind of catty sense. I mean, how do people feel about your presence? So when you come into a room and when you leave, what have you left them with? How do you leave people feeling? That's something that someone said to me a number of years ago that never has left me. How do I leave people feeling? And I do check that with my team. We do have a bit of a temperature check each day. We have these daily huddles and we check how people are feeling on a bit of a thermometer. But I also kind of check in with people about actually how have I made them feel by actually asking for specific and timely feedback. So what I'm suggesting that it's important that we understand how people experience us. I think it's key for us to understand how people feel when we leave the room. How do you leave people feeling? Do people feel confident in your ability to deliver? Are they wanting to help you to deliver on what you've suggested in terms of your goals? One of the ways in which you can do this is just by asking people in the moment, as I said. So after a difficult meeting or interaction, I often ask for feedback face to face. So I don't wait to sit behind a computer screen and ask for 360 feedback for my appraisal. I actually ask them in that moment. You'll often get much more candid feedback if you ask people in those moments, because it will be unfiltered typically. They won't be thinking, how do I give you a bit of a praise sandwich? The third then is focusing on your personal developments. There are times when we're more focused on what's going our way than focusing on what we need to do to enhance our and develop our own capabilities. You may have applied for a job recently that you've been unsuccessful for. My suggestion is move on and move on quickly. Focus your energies on what you can control, not what you can't control. We can keep critiquing and thinking, well, why didn't the panel put me through? But the reality is that's gone. What you now need to focus on is actually where in that space of personal development, what do I need to focus? And it might be that you need to focus on your resilience actually, because you will be knocked back. We can talk about it I've been knocked back countless times, but actually the strength of you is getting up and moving on to the next thing. Each year, I set myself a few objectives of things I'd like to achieve. So one may be work related, it's typically only one, but the rest is simply about me. What do I want out of life? Because we bring our whole selves to work, so developing all the other dimensions of who we are can only be a positive thing. Okay, on to looking outwards then. So think about others in the future then. One of the things that I have been committed to throughout my career is actually thinking about how I develop others around me. And that isn't necessarily always down. It can be across and it can be up. Yeah? It is important that we think about how we pull others up. So one of the things that I'm always keen to be involved in is things like the HR graduate programme and having someone to mentor on that programme. Creating a pipeline, I would suggest, is all of our responsibility. Not just simply because I've got director in my title, is it only my responsibility to help the pipeline. There will be, I guarantee you, somebody that you don't know that is looking up to you and thinking, how did you do what you've done? I guarantee you. I'll tell you a really quick story. I owned a Peugeot 307 years ago. It was a bit of a disaster car. It started jerking every time I was trying to change gear. It was awful. But I stood outside my house, I can't remember what I was doing, and I saw a guy walk past with his little boy, and he said to his little boy, one day we'll have a car like that. How did I feel? Yeah, it filled me, because all of a sudden I thought, that thing that I've got, that thing that I've achieved, and that I thought was nothing and get rid of it, was something what somebody wanted and wanted to aspire to with their child. So think about that in the context of yourself. Somebody's looking up to you. So how can you support and develop others? I currently mentor 2 women at various different stages in their career. The first is a HR graduate and the other is a long-serving civil servant. And they will take different things from me. So people will take different things from you at all stages of your career. Final 2 tips then. Find an advocate that you admire. We all need support from time to time. We need to feel inspired, and having someone you admire to touch base with is so beneficial. I've used the word advocate But it comes in many forms. It could be a mentor, a coach, it could be a colleague or a friend. I've previously talked at previous talks about the kind of people that have helped to influence and shape my career. There is somebody in every organisation that I've worked in who's been an advocate, and they haven't always been a line manager. So, you know, search kind of what far and wide, but simply find somebody that you admire and who can assist. And the final point, I'm not going to dwell on this point, but is build your networks. You'll hear this probably any conference that you go to where it's about kind of self-development. You will hear people talk about build networks. But I would like to remind you of how critical it is, because, you know, you don't know where that connection might lead you. I know Jennifer through the Civil Service Commission, badgering Jennifer, who knew that our paths were going to cross again today, and who knows when our paths might cross again. So really important to build those networks. I hope that there will be something in what I've said this morning that each of you will be able to take from today. I made it to the place that I wanted to be, and I know that you can too. Thank you.
Right, so who's heard of the superhero pose? Have you all heard of the superhero pose? Yeah. Right, so the superhero pose is I think, I can't remember who the lady is, I don't know if anyone knows her name, but when you're not feeling terribly confident, you're about to go in for an interview, or you are about to stand up and speak in front of lots of people you don't know, there is something about doing the superhero pose. Right, so I'd like you all just to kind of stand up and just help me with this. Okay, so just on your feet. Right, so we're going to get the blood flowing. Right, so just think of Wonder Woman. Pretty good. Right, okay, Superman, whoever you want to be, right, but just stand tall, just put your hands on your hips. Right, and hopefully that's how you're going to walk out this room. Okay, take a seat, thank you. Right, okay, so my name's Nira Matada. I think on the booklet it says that I recently joined the Home Office. Actually, I joined the Home Office 2 years ago, and I've just moved roles. So I'm now at DEFRA. I joined DEFRA about 4 weeks ago. So it was really good to hear Claire Moriarty speak. I only heard her speak at the beginning, but I'm doing a presentation for her later today, actually. And I think I'm going to go in introducing myself as who I am with 2 children. So I'm going to see how that goes. Might be slightly career limiting, but anyway, we'll see how we go. Right, so Natasha and I, yes, you know, we have had different journeys, but listening to Natasha, actually my journey started with my mum too. So my mum came to this country when she was 9 years old. She came from Singapore. She told us when we were children that she came on a boat. So for years I had this image of mum crossing the sea in a boat, but she actually came on a really big ship. So there's kind of like some slight disconnect in language there. But my mum was quite unique for her time. So she came to this country in the sort of mid-60s, and she had a really difficult marriage and quite a hard time actually. So she was very clear to my brother and sister and I that no matter what happened, we'd always be able to stand on our own 2 feet. So getting an education, giving us an education was the most important thing for her. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is paving the way. It's about how we pave the way. I'm an older sibling. Is anyone else here an older sibling? The pain of being an older sibling. My sister tells me being a middle child is a lot worse, but I don't actually believe that. There is something about going first and doing it first, and then it makes it a little bit easier for your younger siblings. So the first time I stayed out all night was paving the way, and then when my brother and sister did it, there were no repercussions. But anyway, so when I was growing up, there was a generation that came before me. So a generation between, I guess, my mum and me to some extent, and they were Punjabi girls that were trying to make their way in a new world, and many of them ran away from home, were disowned. You know, there was, I remember like really big scandals when I was growing up, and actually to some extent they paved the way for me, for the generation that came behind them. So My career started after I left university, and I went to work in the private sector for a while, but the calling to the civil service was quite great. So I studied social policy and economics, and I always wanted to be a civil servant. So I applied for a job at Heathrow to work in HR, and on my very first day I got put in a uniform and stuck on the front line and became a customs officer because they didn't have enough women on the front line at the time. So that's where my civil service career started, and it was the best job I ever did. Probably the hardest job I ever did, but actually the best job that I ever did. It was incredibly sexist, so that was the hard part. It was a little bit like, so have any of you seen the programme Life on Mars? It was a little bit like that, and it was a pretty tough environment. But for the first 10 years of my career, and when I was reflecting on this, what I did was I kind of got my head down and I just worked really hard, and I took opportunities. I ended up applying for the internal fast stream, and I just worked and worked and worked, and then I stopped, and I looked around me, and I was like, okay, well, what do I do next? And actually, I was a little bit exhausted. If I'm honest, I'd had two children. I kind of lost a bit of my confidence. I'd found myself in roles where actually they weren't particularly fulfilling. I got told by one grade 7 that I wouldn't amount to much. So that is the truth. And I was like, I need some help. And when we talk about empowerment, there is a great deal of empowerment that you can do for yourself. But actually, sometimes you just need some help. And one of the things I would say is I'm not stood here today doing what I'm doing because I did it by myself. I had a lot of support around me, but I had to go out and find that support and seek that support. So what I worked on was my work-life balance, because that was completely out the window. I worked on my confidence. I worked on my own self-awareness, and I know Claire spoke about this, about kind of knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not so good at and how you're going to work on that, but actually really focusing on the things that you are really good at. And what I also did was I looked up and I didn't see anyone like me. But what I did find were lots of really strong women in the organisation that I was working in. And I actually went out to seek those strong women and to get a sense of actually what did they do and what was their journey like. And when I talk about paving the way, maybe 20, 25 years ago, when we think about kind of race and kind of the problems that we have in terms of representation at senior grades, it was very much the same for women. So to some extent, these women had paved the way before I had come along. So what I did was I did seek lots of advice, and there. Ooh, just jumped ahead there. And there are some things that I kind of want to sort of share with you. But the one thing I do want to share, which I think is incredibly important, is that it's about choices. At any time, if you feel that you don't have choices, that's when you feel disempowered. So it's always about having choices, and it's also about taking action. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and it's Chatham House Rules, about my time in the Home Office. And I spent 2 years in the Home Office, which were incredibly challenging years for me, probably some of the most challenging I've ever had. And some of that was for personal reasons, because I had a really difficult year last year. My dad died suddenly. I had real problems with my 15-year-old son. If anyone's got teenagers or has young children right now, it just gets worse, by the way. It doesn't get any easier.
Thanks, Mary.
You just get more sleep, but that's about it. So I had a really, really challenging sort of personal time as well. And at the point where I felt that where I was somewhere where the people around me in the organisation that I worked in didn't necessarily share the same values as me, I decided it was time for me to move. And at any point in your career, when you feel that you're wading through treacle or it feels difficult, chances are it's because where you are just doesn't share the same value set that you have. And that's not anything to do with what the Home Office does, by the way, because the Home Office does some really incredible things. And it wasn't so much about what the Home Office does, it was actually about the people around me, and realising that they didn't have the same values. And I have very, very clear kind of civil service values about integrity and about doing the right thing. Which kind of leads me to this point around authentic leadership. Now, when people talk about authentic leadership, this isn't about me bringing my Punjabi self to work every day, right? Okay, it's a little bit more than that. When we talk about authentic leadership, it is about you as an individual being open, being transparent, sharing your experiences, because there's nothing wrong with sharing your experiences. Don't be afraid to do that. The good things that have happened, the not so good things that have happened, because that's how people learn. Being self-aware, being open and encouraging others, remaining true to yourself. And that's what I talk about, sticking to my principles, really important. Being a good listener and leading with some clarity. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to adapt to situations. You know, I think recently, if any of you have applied for FLS, there was a situational judgment test, and some people came to ask me for advice about, you know, what do I do about the situational judgment test? And it's about you being able to flex in particular situations, but actually just not losing the core of who you are. When I talk about sort of 10 years ago and how I felt I kind of lost a little bit of who I was. So it's about kind of finding that and kind of moving forward. Okay. So networking and mentoring. So, you know, I talk about paving the way. It's also about paying it forward. So you would have received lots of advice from today, from your experiences and everything else. And there's something about being able to kind of pay that forward. But it's also, you're not going to be everyone's role model. That was a bit of a penny drop moment for me. You know, people would be like, oh, you're BAME. You can go and speak to lots of BAME people. But actually, I'm not everyone's role model, right? I have very different experiences and we're all individuals. And I think sometimes we kind of forget that when we talk about women or we talk about BAME. We are individuals. And I'll tell you a little story. So I think it was the year before last, Civil Service Live, that was here at the Queen Elizabeth Centre. I was asked to do some speed mentoring. So I put my name down and a little bit about myself, and I sat down and I was going to see 5 people through the day. So what happened was, out of the 5 people that came to see me, 4 were Nigerian men. And it wasn't until the fourth one that came along, and he said to me, so each time they came in and shook my hand and sat down, they kind of looked a little bit surprised. But anyway, we just carried on with the speed mentoring. I didn't think anything of it. And then when the 4th individual came and sat down, he said to me, did you know that your first name is a Nigerian man's name? And I was like, okay, so this is now all making a lot more sense, right? So I had no idea. And what they were seeking was a role model. They were seeking somebody just like them, right? So yeah, I just tested that story with Natasha. I was like, do I tell that story?
Yes,
but anyway, so it's and the thing is, even. And one of the things I would say is you will be pushed towards mentors, or you will seek a mentor, and sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. The best thing to do is just gracefully exit if it doesn't work. You know, and I had a young Punjabi girl actually come and speak to me and ask me if I would be her mentor. And after the second sort of conversation that we had, I think she realised that actually I was a completely different generation to her, and this wasn't going to work. And you know, so it's okay when that happens. It's just about finding the right people. I won't talk too much about networking because we've kind of touched on that already. Supporting the next generation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about race, but what I'm going to talk about is about all protected characteristics. So we're in a kind of moment in time, I think. And one of the things I would say is that when I was growing up, and I grew up in like the 70s and 80s, and I was at secondary school in the late 80s. I never had a problem with my body image. Right? Do you know what? I never even thought about it, and I've reflected on that sort of quite a lot. And everything that you see online, all the pressures that we're under, is just incredible. And I feel them. As a woman in her 40s now, I really feel that pressure. And I never ever felt that before. To some extent, it's the same with race as well. And there was a study that was done recently. Well, actually, it was back in 2015. So, but I suspect the figures are probably similar, if not worse. By Show Racism the Red Card. And they interviewed school children between the age of 10 and 16, and they asked them about racism. And they said, oh, racism's a really, really bad thing, right? And they all universally agreed that it was a bad thing. But when they were asked to talk about immigration and non-white people living in the UK, their attitudes were incredibly negative. And they believed, and 60% of them believed that asylum seekers and immigrants were going to steal their jobs, right? So I assumed, and it's always a really, really dangerous thing, the new generation of people that will come behind us, and even young people that have started in the workplace now, be they women or be they women of colour or just people of colour, that they're going to have it a bit easier than us. And the attitudes will change and our perceptions will change, but we've still got a lot of work to do. And I remember speaking to somebody recently who just joined the organisation, just to get her feeling and her understanding of kind of how it felt being an Asian woman coming into the organisation. And she was a lot more relaxed than I certainly was when I first started, a lot more confident than I was perhaps when I first started. But that kind of feeling of people judging me for who I am and what I look like, and actually being a person of colour was still there, and it hasn't gone away. And actually people's perceptions of us as women and perceptions of people as colour still remains, and we still have some work to do, and that's why I talk about paving the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit let's talk about race. So has anyone heard of Sandra Kerr? Yeah, okay, yeah. Sandra Kerr's great. Sandra Kerr conducted a study called Race at Work. Called Race at Work. And what the report found was 63% of all people are not comfortable talking about race in the workplace, with 66% of employees from BAME backgrounds saying that they felt their colleagues were not comfortable with talking about race at work. Now, I feel like if we don't talk about it and we don't surface it, then actually we just kind of bury it, and those perceptions continue. One of the things I do when I meet people or I go into a new workplace, and I think Claire Moriarty talked about this as well, and introducing yourself and how you introduce yourself. I talk about who I am, and not just who I am as an Asian woman, but actually talking about myself in the sense that what you see, there's a whole load of other stuff that goes on underneath. Right? So, my father was from Malaysia. I read The Guardian. My family was working class. I come from a huge family. I'm a terrible dancer. I drink gin on a Friday. I have 2 children. And actually, all of that richness means that I bring a diversity of thought. And we all bring a diversity of thought because we have all this other stuff going on. And when we talk about being an authentic leader, we bring our authentic selves to work, and we bring all of that thought and all of that feeling and everything else to work, which is so incredibly important. And we need to talk about it. And we need to talk about kind of how it feels for us as women in the workplace, and how it feels for us as women of colour in the workplace. We all struggle with with kind of, certainly when you get to my age, I'm kind of like the squeezed middle where I have elderly parents and elderly in-laws, and I have young children, and that in itself is difficult and is quite unique in terms of my circumstances. And it's about seeking and finding those people that kind of share very similar things to you. It's incredibly important. And then I just want to leave with one thing, well, 2 things actually, apart from the fact that I'm going through a midlife crisis right now, so I thought I'd just share that with you. But the second thing is something that Sandra Kerr said, there is only one race, and that's the human race. Okay, thank you very much.